Hi everyone, welcome to the July edition of the Well Works for You live webinar series. In case you're just joining us for the first time this month, the Well Works for You health coaches have been presenting the most popular health topics for 2017 in this monthly live webinar format. My name is Erin. I'm a registered dietitian and a health coach. I want to thank you for dialing in today for today's discussion on food safety. We're going to talk specifically about summer food safety, but also how to practice food safety every day and all year round. So let's go ahead, we'll jump in and get started. On today's agenda, we have what is food safety and why is food safety important? What food safety tips can you follow at home? And now that it's summertime, we're smack in the middle of summer, there's still 2 months of summer left technically. How do we keep our food safe when we go on picnics? How do we stay safe when we're grilling? And some additional tips on how to pack your cooler and some good picnic foods you can have on hand. So let's start with what we mean by food safety. Food safety is the handling, preparation, and storage of food in ways that prevent foodborne illness. So there are certain rules and routines that we should follow so that we avoid potentially severe health hazards. The sad thing is that many people are going to experience a foodborne illness at some point in their lives. So this really highlights the importance of making sure the food we eat is not contaminated with bacteria, parasites, viruses, toxins, or other chemicals. And it's also important to note that food can become contaminated at any point during production, distribution, and preparation of food. So everyone along the production chain, from the producer all the way to the consumer, has a role to play to make sure that the food you're eating is safe and doesn't cause illness. So why is it important to talk about food safety? First, you can't see, smell, or taste harmful bacteria in foods that may cause foodborne illness. So that's why it's important to follow these rules and procedures and routines, because it's not easy to identify while you're cooking food. Again, food can become contaminated at any point during production, distribution, or preparation of food. So everyone on the whole chain has to be careful and has a role to play to make sure the food we eat doesn't become contaminated. Some information from the World Health Organization. There's more than 200 diseases that are spread through food. Contaminated food can cause long-term health problems depending on what kind of illness that you get from that. Foodborne illnesses are going to impact those with more compromised immune systems more than others. So that means small children or babies, the elderly, and those with chronic diseases and conditions are going to be more impacted by foodborne illness. There are so many opportunities for food contamination to take place. So everybody must take their role in keeping food safe, and everybody should be well informed on food safety practices, the rules, and the procedures. So let's jump into how we do keep our food safe. There are 4 food safety basics that we should follow at all times. The first is to keep things clean. So this involves washing our hands regularly, but also keeping your work surfaces clean. Wipe down your cutting boards and counters. Keep raw meat separate from foods that are ready to eat. You want to avoid cross-contamination and mixing your raw meat, poultry, seafood with fruits, vegetables, or other foods that are ready to be consumed raw. You want to make sure you're cooking food to the proper temperature at all times. And you want to make sure that when you're storing food that you're chilling it or freezing it and refrigerating it promptly. So food safety, it's not just limited to cooking and storing your food. For you, for me, for the consumer, it actually starts at the grocery store. So that includes how you select and transport your food. There are several steps you can take to make sure that you're keeping your food as safe as possible. The first is to try and choose your refrigerated and frozen items after you select your non-perishable items at the grocery store. So that means go to the freezer section and go to the produce and the milk and the egg section last. If you're going to shop the middle of the store, shop that section first. Never choose meat or poultry in packaging that's torn or leaking. You want to avoid cross-contamination. Avoid buying food that's past the sell-by or use-by date on the package. Be extra careful when you're buying canned goods. You really want to examine your canned goods, and you want to avoid purchasing any that are bulging or severely dented. Next, make sure any product that has a seal has not been tampered with or the seal has not been broken. If you're one that uses reusable grocery bags, they're very popular. Lots of people are using them now. Make sure that you're washing them regularly. And then once you purchase your groceries, take them home and store them immediately. And as you're taking them home to store them, keep any foods that are perishable in an air-conditioned car and out of your hot trunk during the summer months. So next in the chain of food safety is how you store your food. Once you get your food home safely, you followed the shopping guidelines, you want to make sure that you're following the food safety storage guidelines. So first, it's important that you refrigerate your perishable food within 1 hour. Don't let it sit out all day. Don't let it sit in the car. It should go right into the refrigerator or right into the freezer. You should check your refrigerator temperature and make sure that your refrigerator is set at 40 degrees or below. And your freezer temperature should be set at 0 degrees or below. If you purchase fresh poultry, fish, or ground meat, that should ideally be cooked within 2 days, or if you're not going to cook it within 2 days, put it in the freezer within 2 days. Other types of meat products, such as other cuts of beef, veal, lamb, or pork, you want to use or freeze those within 3 to 5 days. As you're storing your meat and poultry in the refrigerator or in the freezer, you want to make sure it's wrapped securely, and you want to store it on the most bottom shelf of the refrigerator you can. This is so in case there is leaking, your chicken or your beef or other animal product proteins are not leaking onto other foods that are in your refrigerator. If you're storing canned foods in your home, make sure that they're not being stored at freezing temperatures or at any temperature above 90 degrees. The next step you want to pay attention to is preparation. So as you get started preparing your foods, of course, first you want to keep that first basic step of food safety in mind, and you want to clean your hands. So wash your hands first with warm water and soap. Additionally, make sure that you're starting with clean cutting boards and clean surfaces. They haven't been contaminated. Avoid that cross-contamination by continuing to keep raw meat, poultry, fish, or any juice that is on them away from other foods. Continuously wash your cutting boards, your utensils, and your countertops each time you prepare or cut a raw meat product. And then lastly, let's quick talk about marinating meat. So if you're marinating chicken or fish or some kind of beef product, and you're doing, a longer marinade, you want to make sure that you're putting that meat and poultry in a covered dish or a Ziploc bag, and you're marinating it in the refrigerator. Make sure that you're not leaving marinated meat or poultry or seafood out on the countertop. Once it's marinated, don't reuse that marinade because it's been contaminated with raw meat, raw seafood, raw fish. So don't reuse the marinade, and don't use it on cooked meat because you'll be cross-contaminating and adding uncooked meat products onto your cooked products. So remember, when you're marinating food, don't reuse the marinade and don't use it on cooked meat. I want to share some guidelines with you when it comes to cooking your meat, cooking your poultry. So when you're measuring the temperature of your food, you should always use a meat thermometer and you should remove the meat from the heat source while taking the temperature. This, you'll make sure that you get a more accurate temperature if your thermometer is not in the heat source. So raw beef, pork, lamb, veal, steaks, pork chops, roast, they all need to be cooked to an internal temperature of 145 degrees. Ground meats should be cooked to an internal temperature of 160 degrees. And poultry should be cooked to an internal temperature of 165 degrees. Once you've removed your food source from the heat source, you've taken the temperature and it's at the proper temperature, allow your meat or your poultry to rest for up to 3 minutes to allow the juices to settle. If you're not in the habit of using a meat thermometer, or some people I talk to are very nervous to start cooking meat and protein because they don't want to undercook it, a meat thermometer is a great way to get started with that, really so you know that you're cooking meat to the proper internal temperature and that you're consuming safe meat products. So maybe you freeze your food, you're not going to use it, or you buy it in bulk and you freeze it, and now you want to thaw it out to cook. There are several ways that you can thaw food that you would like to cook. The best and the safest way to thaw your food is to put frozen food in the refrigerator and allow it to slowly thaw under proper refrigeration. This keeps it at a safe temperature the entire time it's thawing. You can also thaw food by submerging it in cold tap water. If you do decide to go with this method, you want to make sure that you're cooking your food immediately after it's thawed. This means that you don't want to thaw chicken while you're getting ready for work in the morning in a bowl of cold water and then put it in the refrigerator for the rest of the day and cook it when you get home at night. You're going to want to cook it immediately. The last method of thawing is microwave thawing. And just like using tap water, if you thaw something in the microwave, you want to completely cook it afterwards. A really important point is that always remember that you should never use countertop thawing. This leaves your food very susceptible to foodborne illness as it's not being stored and maintained at the proper temperature. If you put a cut of meat or a chicken breast or seafood on the counter to thaw at room temperature, it's going to take a very long time to thaw out. And during that time, the temperature of the food is rising to an unsafe level. And it's usually going to stay on the counter for a longer period of time. So there's really never a situation where countertop thawing is safe or recommended. So if you're going to thaw, make sure that you do it under refrigeration, you do it in cold water, or you use microwave thawing. And for the latter two, you want to make sure that you're cooking it immediately. Next is if you're going to be serving or holding food outside of refrigeration for a period of time, there are also guidelines that you should follow. First, hot foods should be held at 140 degrees or warmer, and cold foods should be held at 40 degrees or lower. If this is the case, if you're holding foods outside of refrigeration, you absolutely want to use a food thermometer, and you want to continually check your food temperature to help make sure your food is being maintained at a safe temperature. If you have foods that can be served at room temperature, it's recommended that you only leave them at room temperature for no more than 2 hours. You don't want to keep them at room temperature for long periods of time or all day. If you're hosting a buffet, you have food out on buffet, you can use some strategies to keep your hot food hot, like using chafing dishes or slow cookers, and you can also use warming trays. And you can keep cold food cold by placing it on bowls of ice, or instead of putting out a large serving of a cold food, put it out in smaller servings and replace that small serving more often. That way you know you're keeping it under refrigeration and it's going to stay at a safer temperature. Once you've prepared and served your food and now you're getting ready to clean it up and put it away, you might have leftovers. And leftovers can be a great strategy for keeping on track during the week and not throwing food away. But you do want to discard any leftovers for any food that's left out or at room temperature for more than 2 hours. If it's been out at room temperature for more than 2 hours, it's not safe to refrigerate and then consume again. Once you've identified the food that is safe to consume that you can store as leftovers, you want to place it into shallow containers and immediately refrigerate or freeze it. Once that's done and you move on with your day, you move on with your week, you want to make sure that you're using those leftovers within 3 to 4 days. Anything past 4 days really needs to be discarded. And when you're reheating leftovers, you want to make sure that you're using a food thermometer and you're cooking them to an internal temperature of 165 degrees. This is going to help ensure that you're killing any type of foodborne illness that might be present, or if it was a food that you had been holding at a hot temperature or a cold temperature for a long period of time, heating it up ensures that your food is as safe as possible to eat. So those are some of the basics of food safety. Those are the steps, the strategies, the rules, and the procedures we all should be following every day to make sure that the food that we're consuming and preparing at home for us, for our families, when hosting other people, is safe to eat. But it is summertime. We're right in the middle of summer. Summer is going to go through the next couple months. So it's also important to talk about some specific summer food safety topics. Summertime, it's well known for picnics, barbecues, family gatherings, going to the park, going to the beach. But as the temperature in the summer rises, it gives foodborne bacteria more opportunities to multiply and more opportunities to really thrive in that warm environment. So let's talk about some tips you can follow to keep you and your family and your friends safe when eating outside for the rest of the summer. So just like at home, you want to bring water and soap. You want to wash your hands when you're outside eating. You want to wash any surfaces that you might be putting food on. You want to bring a thermometer if you're grilling food. You want to make sure that you're still cooking your food to the right temperature. If you have food that needs to stay chilled, you should plan to store it in a cooler, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, how you should pack your cooler. If you're bringing uncooked meat with you, or chicken, poultry, seafood, make sure that you're sealing it in a well-sealed container or a Ziploc bag. And just like you would store it on the bottom shelf of your refrigerator, you want to store any uncooked meat on the bottom of your cooler, again, to prevent any juices that escape from leaking all over your other food. You want to make sure that you're putting cooked foods, grilled foods, on a clean plate. You don't want to reuse a plate that you might have put raw meat or raw poultry on. When you're lugging your cooler out of the car to the beach site or the picnic site or wherever you're going, keep the cooler in the shade to try to keep the cooler as cold as possible. If you have foods that need to stay chilled that you're serving throughout the day, don't keep them out. Serve them, get your serving, and put it right back on ice so that you're keeping it at a safe temperature. And then in general, if you're outside and it's hot and you're grilling and you have these foods outside, you really want to discard any leftover meat, chicken, any fish, eggs, or any food made with any of those items. If they were out for more than 1 hour and temperatures that are over 90 degrees, get rid of it. It's best to not keep the leftovers. It's best to know that you're doing the safest thing possible. Along with picnicking might come grilling, so there's grill safety guidelines you want to follow. Just like the marinating guidelines that we talked about when you're marinating food at home, you want to follow those proper rules and procedures when it comes to marinating food that you're going to cook on the grill. So keep it in a covered dish, keep it chilled until you're ready to cook, and don't reuse the marinade. Use that food thermometer I asked you to bring to your picnics and barbecues to make sure that you're cooking all the food thoroughly and properly. Keep food that needs to be hot and grilled is ready to eat. Keep it hot until it's ready to be consumed. That 1 hour in 90-degree temperature is going to come fast. So the longer you keep it at a safe temperature, the longer that you can consume it. Again, don't reuse platters or utensils that might be susceptible to cross-contamination. And then when you're using a grill, if you're using a grill spatula or a grill brush, or maybe you're using a grill that was at a beach site or at a park site, make sure that you're just checking your food for foreign objects. Make sure that there's nothing left on the grill from someone else that could get in your food. Make sure that there's no parts of the spatula or parts of the grill brush that could be stuck in your food. So there's ways to keep safe with your food when you're grilling, but there's also things you want to keep in mind for actual grill safety when you're using your propane grill. You want to make sure that your grill is safe to use. So you want to make sure that you're checking all the major connection points on your grill between the gas tank hose, the regulator cylinder, where the hose connects to the burners. You want to check all of those and make sure that you're tightening anything that's loose. You can use a soap and water solution on all the hose and the connectors of the propane tank. When you turn on the propane tank, if there's bubbles, if bubbles start forming, they'll be large enough for you to see. It could mean that there is a gas leak. Something is not right. You want to turn the tank off, check the connections again, and have your grill serviced by a professional before using it again. If you suspect there is anything wrong with your propane tank, your hose, the regulator cylinder, the burners, you want to get it checked immediately. Do not turn it on again. If you use the soap and water solution, there's no bubbles. That means that your grill is safe to use. Once you've determined your grill is safe to use, you turn it on, you're ready to go, you're cooking. That doesn't mean that there could never be a problem just because you've tested it. So if you smell gas while you're cooking, you need to turn off the gas tank and turn off the burners immediately. If the leak stops immediately, that's great, that's good for you. You want to have the grill serviced by a professional before you use it again. Don't turn it on again. There was a problem. It was great that it stopped when you turned it off, but have it serviced immediately. However, if the smell continues after you turn off the gas tank and burners, you need to move away from the grill and call the fire department immediately. Do not try to move the grill. The fire department will come out and they will deal with the rest. So when you're grilling, make sure that you're knowing that your grill is safe to use as well. Not just the foods, but that everything with your grill is working properly. So some general tips for grilling safety are make sure that you're only using propane and charcoal barbecue grills outside. Place the grill away from your home, away from your deck railings. Make sure that it's not under any trees. Make sure there's no low-hanging branches around. You don't want to create a fire hazard. Children and pets should always be kept away from grills. They should never be allowed to play near it or use it. You want to make sure that you're keeping your grill clean. You're not letting things build up on it, which could cause a fire hazard. And of course, one of the most important things is never leave your grill unattended. You wouldn't leave your stove on and go out for the day. You don't want to leave your grill on and go back inside the house and walk away from it. You want to make sure that you're attending to your grill and the food that's on the grill. If you have any questions about grill safety, you can visit the National Fire Prevention Agency, and they have lots of tips on grill safety and preventing fires. So let's talk a little bit about packing your cooler. Bringing a cooler is essential if you're bringing food out with you. It's a great way to keep your food safe for as long as possible. If you plan on being at the beach, the park, if you're going to another outdoor event where you'll bring food, it's important that you're preparing your cooler ahead of time. You're making the best decisions ahead of time to keep your food as safe as possible. The first first thing that you want to do is you really want to get a head start. You want to take the cooler out of storage at least the night before. So if it's being stored in your attic or the trunk of your car or your garage, pull it out, clean it up, and make sure that you're bringing it up to room temperature. You don't want to put your food in a cooler that's been in the trunk of your car all summer. That's 95 degrees. So make sure that you're bringing it inside, bringing it up to room temperature. Next is you want to prepare your ice ahead of time. This means that you have plenty of ice that's ready to go, whether that's loose ice, bags of ice, that should all be ready to go. It can also be helpful if you prepare blocks of ice. So if you freeze large amounts of water in Tupperware containers or in huge Ziploc bags, they take longer to melt. They're easier to put over your food in a large blanket, and they can help keep your food colder longer. Last is to make sure that any food that you'll want to have chilled for your outdoor event is prepared and actively chilling the night before you need to store it in the cooler. This is going to help ensure that your food gets as cold as possible before loading it into your cooler. So you don't want to make a pasta salad, say, right before you need to leave. All the ingredients have been at room temperature, and then you're putting it in a cooler. That's not the safest way to go about things. It's better to have it prepared and completely chilled the night before. Next is to make sure that you're arranging your cooler properly. So you want to load your chilled food straight from the refrigerator into the cooler just before you leave the house. Keep it under refrigeration as long as you possibly can. You want to pack items in reverse order so that the foods you'll eat last, they're going to be at the bottom of the cooler. All the frozen and chilled food is going to be on top of it. So when it's ready to eat or when you're ready to eat it, it's going to still be cold. Again, if you're bringing raw meat or poultry, you want to store that on the bottom of your cooler. And it's a good idea to pack all your food in watertight or Ziploc containers, not just meat, poultry, or seafood products. Pack everything in a container or a Ziploc bag to keep it safe, to keep anything from possibly cross-contaminating with it. And divide larger portions of food into smaller, shallow containers. So if you're making a big fruit salad, consider putting it into multiple small Tupperware containers. This is going to help keep it colder longer. When you're arranging your cooler, think about your drinks. It's generally a good idea to pack a separate cooler specifically for drinks. Generally, the cooler is going to be opening and closing a lot to pull drinks out, probably more frequently than a food cooler would be open and closed. So keep your food colder longer by keeping the lid shut as much as possible and keeping your drinks in another container. You can also think about partially freezing things like water bottles or cans or juice boxes prior to packing them, so it just is going to keep that cooler cold longer as well. So once you've packed your cooler, everything's cold, everything's where it's supposed to be at the proper temperature, now your goal for the rest of your outdoor event is to keep your food cold, keep it safe to eat. So while you're traveling to your destination, keep your cooler in your car if you can, and keep it out of your trunk. Your car is probably going to be colder, the air conditioner is going to be on, and the trunk is going to be much hotter. Once you get to your destination, keep it in a shady spot and try to cover it with a blanket or a tarp, or even covering it with a wet towel is going to help keep that cooler cold. If you happen to be taking your cooler to the beach, bury the bottom of your cooler in the sand and make sure that you're shading it with an umbrella. You should make sure that the inside of your cooler is below 40 degrees. And again, thermometers are the key to food safety success. So don't try to guess the temperature. Use an appliance thermometer to make sure that you're getting the right temperature. Again, keep the lid closed as much as possible. Don't let the cold air out. Don't let the warm air in. And when you remove food, don't let it sit out for more than 2 hours or more than an hour on days when it's warmer than 90 degrees. So let's wrap up with foods you can pack for your outdoor event. The foods you choose to pack can help reduce the possibility of foodborne illness. So first are fruits and vegetables. You can make fruit or fruit salad, fruit kebabs. You can cut up veggie sticks with dips like hummus. Oil-based salads are great. You can pre-make and chill sandwiches and wraps made with turkey, chicken, lots of vegetables. And keep your snacks easy to eat and out of the potential category of becoming a foodborne illness by packing things like pretzels and popcorn or whole grain tortilla chips, nuts, seeds, trail mix, things that can be at room temperature and you don't risk any foodborne illness with these things. For drinks, make sure that you're packing things like water or unsweetened drinks, unsweetened iced tea, 100% fruit juice. Along with good, healthy foods to pack for your picnic, there's also some foods that you should avoid if you can. So mayo-based salads, those can dip into the food temperature danger zone very quickly. They're hard to maintain their temperature. And as soon as they've been out at that room temperature, they need to be tossed immediately. So it's really best to avoid mayo-based potato salads, macaroni salads, or sour cream and mayo-based dips. Avoid sweetened drinks and excessive alcohol, especially if you're going to be out in the heat. Drinking a lot of alcohol in the heat can be dangerous, and you're likely going to be drinking more if it's hot outside, consuming more fluids. So it helps to keep your calories and your sugar in check if you're not drinking a lot of soda and sweetened beverages. And lastly, just frozen treats. Obviously, like ice cream, popsicles, even chocolate, they're very hard to bring to picnics and to transport. They're likely going to melt very quickly. They're going to make a mess. They're going to leak all over everything. So it can generally be good to avoid bringing those as well. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today to talk about food safety. I hope you learned some guidelines and some of the rules and routines for keeping your food as safe as possible for the remainder of the summer and throughout the rest of the year. Please feel free to join us next month. We're going to be talking about preventative health guidelines and why it's important that you stick to a preventative health schedule.